Time to upgrade my upscaling with the Retrotink 5X. Firstly, this video is not a 2-minute review of the Retrotink where it's plugged into some 1990s console with a really clean video output. Everything is dandy and the reviewer gives it a thumbs up. This has been a long journey from August 2021 and I really need to explain where I'm coming from and what this channel is about. I should also explain before this video begins that the Retrotink is an upscaling device. It takes your RGB, S-video or composite signals and upscales them to HD and then outputs that as HDMI. It is not a capture device. You will still need a separate capture device. If you want to skip to the actual Retrotink hardware review, I'll stick a time on the screen and you can just jump forward. If you own a machine like a SNES or a Mega Drive and you just want an upscaler, then this is it. Just go buy a Retrotink. Video is over. If you own a CPC, BBC, Spectrum, Amiga, Archimedes or any other home microcomputer that I've covered over the many years on ChinnyVision, then watch on. Nearly 8 years ago I launched ChinnyVision after growing tired of bad footage of 8 and 16-bit computers on YouTube. You know the kind of thing. Emulators doing a bad job to begin with, and then the channels cropping the borders out so you ended up with a zoomed in, pixelated mess that makes the output look far worse than it ever was on the real machines. The way I saw it, you could fix this issue by capturing from real hardware. I didn't have any grand ambitions to cover a load of formats, but I figured if I could do the CPC, Spectrum and C64, then I'd be pretty sorted and everything else would just fall into line. C64 is composite, so that's easy to capture, as is my modded Spectrum 48K. The problem came with the CPC and its RGB output. Some people use the Amstrad modulators to convert the output to RF, but that looked awful. What I needed was some way to capture the RGB, but no one sold such a capture device. My first experiments involved capturing the CPC to a DVD recorder. It worked, but it looked poor. But I noticed my Panasonic DVD recorder would accept RGB and could output any of the inputs to component. Could I get a component capture card? Yes, I could, and 200 quid later, I had the Black Magic card I've been using right up until 2022. Connects to my Mac via Thunderbolt, accepts component in, and I can record a pretty good signal into Apple ProRes via the provided Black Magic software. Now there's been upgrades along the way. The Panasonic wouldn't accept the output of every machine I used, and then one day I decided I just needed to cut to the chase and spend some serious money on a Pioneer that I'd seen that just seemed to have loads of inputs, and I was reading the manual and it just seemed to suggest I'm the one for you. Indeed it was. It worked with 95% of everything I've got here, and that's how ChinnyVision has run for about 7 years now. The Pioneer caters for most of my machines, and the ones it doesn't, the Panasonic works with beautifully. Machines like the Mega Drive, Archimedes and Elk. But wait, you've all tuned out after my history lesson. The thing is, my capture setup is really old now. When I started, I was one of the only people using real hardware. Today, everyone uses it on YouTube and Twitch, and frankly, many of them have higher quality output than me. I'm upscaling in my editing software, and the deinterlacing inside the Pioneer isn't very good. Take a look at any 50Hz movement on a 64 game I've captured. It's awful. Capture lag is also a major issue. I've got 2 devices in the chain, the Pioneer and the Black Magic. Each adds lag. I've looked at some of the solutions other people use, but I always seem to be at risk of not having total coverage of my machines. I have a setup that is generally plug and play. Everything works, well, apart from the Mega Drive, but I don't need to change anything. You plug in, it works. And yes, there's all sorts of SCARTA HDMI devices available. I'll see in the comments of this video, people who haven't watched it properly, that Barry Clackers has a 30 quid adapter from eBay. He's really happy with it. It's so good. Yeah, I've seen all of those. I've bought many of them. I didn't even bother to cover them on the channel because some of them were so diabolically rubbish. None of them are any good for one reason or another. You're happy, that's fine. But some people think Mrs. Brown Boys is the pinnacle of comedy. People over the years have suggested to me the OSS-C for the channel, but the problem is that doesn't support S-Video or composite, so it rules out the Commodore 64, the Atari 8-bits, the VIC-20, the Commodore Plus 4, and my Atari 7800. So really, the OSS-C is an RGB-only solution. The Retrotink, on the other hand, supports the lot. The capture situation has been playing on my mind for quite a while as the setup's got older and older and fallen further and further behind other people. And then in the middle of last year, I read about the Retrotink 5X. Or perhaps it's 5 times, I don't know. I'm calling it 5X though. It's a new device from America that was claiming it could do RGB, S-Video, composite and component. The more I read the specs, the more I realised this thing was the answer to my prayers. Full upscaling and HDMI output, immensely configurable, no extra analog stage, and I didn't need to use software upscaling anymore. And the absolute killer, a 1-frame processing delay. 1 frame! There was a problem, however. The device was being made in extremely limited batches, had a long lead time, and was expensive. To the UK user like me, very expensive. $300, then another $65 to get it to the UK, and then there will be an import fee payable to the courier. What's more, each batch produced sold out very quickly, within hours, and I missed out on my first attempt. But on the 28th of August, while I was at a family barbecue, I was online within seconds of a new batch being available and immediately paid £278 from the ChinnyVision Patreon funds to get a Retrotink. And a big thanks to the ChinnyVision Patreon supporters who make all this insanity possible. There's no way I would have been doing this without you guys. Thank you. So I paid my money and all I had was a notification from PayPal saying some money had gone. About a month later, I got the notification of dispatch of the Retrotink. It then went to DHL, came over to the UK, and I had to pay the duty and all the rest of it, and it turned up. Brilliant. Unpacked it, plugged it in, and, well, to be honest, I was underwhelmed because I plugged it into my CPC and no matter what I did, the picture would jitter. The same with my Spectrum Plus 2. You could plug it into a Dreamcast or a machine like that, a Mega Drive, and it looked brilliant, but with the stuff that mattered for me, it wasn't working. Time passed, firmware updates came out, nothing seemed to improve that much, and then at Christmas, the big firmware update came 3 months after I got the device, and suddenly I had a working Amstrad CPC, Sinclair Spectrum, and all the rest of it. It wasn't the cables or anything else, it was the device and the firmware, and now I could really begin to play with it. So this is the point where I actually look at the device. And let's pretend it's not February the 20th, but is in fact the end of September last year. And oh look, the postman's been and my Retrotink has arrived. I haven't been using it for 5 months, honest. So let's open the box and see what you get. Get a nice logo on the box there as well, the Retrotink stuff there. You open it up and there's a remote which looks like it's from some other device, because why would it have a mouse logo there? Got a home button, a menu button, some arrow keys. So, I mean, it's something that's clearly been made for another device. It doesn't come with batteries either. You put your own batteries in, that's fine. Don't expect to have batteries, especially when they're shipping overseas. But yeah, the remote controller is slightly odd, but we'll look at that properly in a minute. You get a Retrotink sticker. I mean, why we need that, I don't know. And this is the extent of your instructions, because you're going to have to go online to find the proper instructions. What it does is it tells you here what the remote control does. So it's kind of, yeah. So your volume up and volume down buttons aren't actually volume up and volume down buttons. They cycle to next interpolation mode. That exits OSD, that's fine. That goes through the OSD, fine. Power on, fine. Home has the same function as the input button. Where's the input button? So it's all a bit, how are you doing? Now, the reason I'm dismissive of this sticker is, why bother with this sticker when perhaps what should have happened is an overlay should have been made for this to tell you actually what's going on. That'd be handy, wouldn't it? Because fair enough, it's cheaper to buy a generic remote control in from another device, and it's pretty much there. It's got all the controls on it. But this versus actually just going to printing something on there that you could stick on with a sticker, that's probably what should have happened for 300 quid. But we go in the box and you get this SCART output and input device with S-Video and phonos on there, the kind of thing you've probably got 100 of already. And then there's the main event, which is the Retrotink itself, which comes in this little Hessian bag. It's very nice. I think it's Hessian. Is it Hessian? Don't know. And you know, you pull out the device here, and it has the feel of a SCART switcher from Tandy from 1997. It's very light. Certainly doesn't feel like a 300 quid device, but the magic is inside, right? It's not in the case. It is a nicely injected molded case with a logo on the side. It's very light, and you'll notice some feet on the bottom there. I've had to put them on there. They didn't come with the device because when you plug it in, it just skids around the table, especially with heavy SCART cables on the end. So, yeah, you'll be wanting to add feet again, like the overlay. Why wouldn't you put feet on it? Don't know. Up one end, you've got a SCART input, and that does RGB component, I think, and composite. You've got some phonos down the back for component. One of those also does composite, but it doesn't say necessarily which one. You've got a S-Video input, HDMI output. You've only got one of those, so you will need to use an external splitter if you want to have two displays, one for capture, one for a bigger display on your capture device. And it's got a mini or micro, whatever one it is, USB, not USB-C, sadly. I'd expect in a modern device, which everything seems to be switching to, like the Raspberry Pi, for example, which uses the more modern USB-C as an input. I mean, that's a Raspberry Pi, that, with a case, that feels like a substantial device. This, I say, feels like a SCART switcher, but the magic is on the inside. So again, you know, that's a minor point. Now, because we live in 2022, before you plug this in, of course, you're going to have to do a firmware update because that's how things work these days. This will require a Windows PC, not a Mac, and you have to follow some simple instructions to update the device, and then you are ready to go. So what kind of results does this very expensive device housed in what feels like a 10 quid SCART switching box with a remote from some other device actually deliver? So of course the first machine I plugged it into is my beloved CPC 6128, and there's a huge amount of menu options. I'm not going to run through them all, but the first thing you want to do is turn down the sharpness of the deinterlacing because it looks unnaturally sharp. There are CRT filters in there, you can see them there, and I've activated border 26 white because I want to make some adjustments to that glitching you can see there, and I want to see clearly where I'm making the adjustments. So we go into the video ADC setting. I'm going to start fiddling with adjustments because I really don't know what I'm doing here. Well, kind of do. But there's adjustments you can make in here. But I think it's going to be the LLPLL gain. Either the gain or the one beneath it. SOG threshold is good for dealing with when you've got a rolling picture usually. But that's not what we need here. Let's adjust this one. And our glitching is gone. So at 2 there's glitching there. At 0 we have no glitching. So hopefully that for the CPC is a pretty much perfect picture. I'm sure we can do better than that. Now we can save that into one of the 10 slots on here, which sadly you cannot name. You're going to have to note what machine you've got in each slot, which seems slightly nuts, but there we go. Let's try a game. Of course, I'm going to push the Retrotink with funny screen mode, so let's try Out of This World. With its wide screen here. And it's wonderfully sharp. And that's what it looked like on the old capture setup. And that's upscaled in software, and that's what size it was actually was when I captured it. So a huge improvement already. The Batman demo with its overscan is also a good test. And just look how sharp it is. Look how gorgeous this looks. Overscan on the CPC is always something you can throw displays, but this is all working fine. There's no glitching. I can see. If there is, it's very small amounts. Perhaps tiny little bits of things up the top there, but the CPC's in a funny screen mode anyway, so I'm not going to worry too much about little bits at the edge of the picture. Pinball Dreams, another one with lots of screen modes. This one did cause the Retrotink to briefly lose sync during the introduction sequence when it shows the Digital Illusions logo and switches to the Pinball Dreams loading screen. But apart from that, all fine. Firelord, a more old-fashioned CPC game, looking quite superb. So we're all good on the CPC Amiga. Workbenches never look so good, but let's try super high-res laced mode. It's fine. I was expecting it might lose sync, but no, it looks really good. Lotus looks superb. The Amiga didn't take any tweaking at all, just worked out the box. That's Oscar, and this is Stunt Car Racer. Just looks great. Audio output of the Amiga is pretty loud on my 1200, and I could do with a setting to attenuate the audio on the Retrotink. All those adjustments for video, none for audio. My Grey Plus 2 gives a rolling picture. It doesn't initially, then it starts rolling. This is hopefully fixed by... There we go, that's fixed that. I thought it might be the SOG threshold, but no, it's LLPLLBW. All of these are explained in the manual. It tells you what they do, but the reality is actually you don't need to know. You just fiddle with them until it works, because you're not going to know what's lacking on the input signal. You can tell a little bit from what's happening, but actually it's just fiddling. And there's a status option in the menu there to tell you what's going on. So let's load a game. Alter Beast looking as good as Alter Beast is ever going to look, frankly, which isn't very good, but the capture quality is superb. The new Dizzy game, looking and sounding great. And there's that status display again. You can switch the output at any time. You can also switch the output resolution. I can't show you that because it will immediately crash the capture device. But you can also scale and crop the display, which is good for various machines, especially when overscan is needed. Amiga Workbench, you may well also want to slightly adjust the scaling. Otherwise you may find the top and bottom of the display is cropped on some TVs. Horizontal sampling, you probably don't need to touch that. And deinterlacing, again, it defaults to sharp. I think all our computers look better on medium from what I can see. sharp is just too sharp for our needs. Well, unless you've got a machine that's got a soft output. And again, CRT emulation, which is probably of interest to someone, but not me. So yeah, the Spectrum Plus 2 grey model seems fine. However, just occasionally I'm still getting a frame roll, just inexplicably, and then it goes immediately away. However, the more I use the Spectrum Plus 2 with the Retrotink, this rolling problem still seems to be happening. Here I am playing Airwolf 2, and look, the rolling problem comes back. And the thing is, you can't seem to dial it out. If you reset the device, just reconnect it to the SCART input, it goes away, which is reminiscent of how the device first reacted when I plugged it into the CPC all those months ago. You couldn't dial out the glitching, but if you reconnected, it went away. So I think this is something that's going on inside the Retrotink itself. It's adjusting and then suddenly not getting it right. I don't know, but it is reminiscent of what was happening back then. But wait, what about the other Spectrum models? Well, here's a Plus 2A running SWIV. And this is one of my early capture attempts. It's in the sharpest setting. I think it's too sharp. And my 48K Plus, which is playing up. And the reason it's playing up is because the mods for these machines usually involve a capacitor on the output, and the Retrotink doesn't like that. So you're going to have to think about taking the capacitor out of your 48K or 48K Plus to get this working nicely. You can adjust the Retrotink using the standard definition decoder to get the brightness up and contrast. The problem is the capacitor continuously varies, and then the Retrotink tries to compensate. From the people I've spoken to, get the capacitor out. Other people may disagree. This is what I'm told. But Nightlaw here looking really good once I adjusted the picture. And the horizontal sampling, again, I said you won't need to touch it. It's useful if you've got 16:9 displays or machines with funny aspect ratio outputs. You don't need it for your C64 or BBC Micro. Speaking of C64, here's my C64 in action. Haven't had a chance to test the bread bin because it's currently not working, but it's looking pretty good. Atari ST, and got some issues here. As you can see, it's trying to roll like the Spectrum was, but not quite getting there. On this occasion, adjusting the SOG threshold seems to do it. I've always suspected the output from the ST, on all the ones I have, or both of them, is a little bit on the low side, so adjusting that threshold down seems to have got the picture looking good. But in fact, I still want to boost it up again by going to the post-processing option and just turning the gamma up slightly. I think this is an ST thing. Once you've done that, it's really good. Of course, that's another preset to save, and guess what? You can't name the presets. Another machine not working quite right out the box. BBC Micro just a little bit glitching like the CPC was when I turned it on. Same CRTC chip, of course. So, again, just adjust it in the menus, save a profile, and oh look, again, you can't name it. Barbarian looking good. Arkanoid, though, uses a funny screen mode to get this tall screen. And if you zoom in, look, you can see the geometry is very slightly out. So it's leaning to the left slightly in places. So I think there's more adjustments to be done here in the settings on the BBC To be fair, you probably wouldn't notice that unless you're on a massive display. My MSX2 in RGB and looking fantastic. The MSX1 incidentally as well, my Panasonic. We've used that for Chinny Club and it works fine. Here's the Commodore Plus 4 on S-Video, looking as good as a Commodore Plus 4 ever will. Yes, there's the slight jail barring and so on. I probably should dial down the brightness just a little bit, but it's all looking pretty good. Acorn Archimedes. A little bit of tweaking needed, especially with the screen scaling, just to get the screen in the right position. But it glitched originally, but again, I just dialed in a few adjustments and it seems to work fine. You can't even trip it up on screen mode changes. Tested a couple of games, Pac-Mania looking great, and Swiv, fantastic. Now the Retrotink can capture all sorts of screen modes, which means you can capture PC footage. You need extra kit to capture from PC VGA, but the Retrotink can do it. Here we are in Windows on my Dell laptop, and it's looking great. You will of course need to convert the VGA output to plain RGB and also force via a little program you can get for the PC the computer to output 60 Hz only. And here's Krusty's Funhouse running on the PC. Absolutely fine. As I say, you need a device to convert the VGA to RGB, which also is sold by Retrotink, funnily enough. And here's SimCity. The VIC-20. Interestingly, gave me funny banded output at the beginning, but I remember that the VIC has colour timing adjustments on the circuit board. So after a quick adjustment on the VIC, hey, look, we've got perfect colour on the VIC. Okay, the VIC is never going to look great because the output is pretty ropey, but this looks as good as a VIC probably ever will. My Atari 130 XE, a machine I've always struggled to get a good capture from, and also my 65 XE again. I bought an upgrade for them years ago, a chip for the insides that was going to give it better output. Never got round to fitting it. But look how good this looks. Ball Blazer. Wow. It's still not great. There's still a lot of noise there, but the colour timing issues seem to have gone away. Brilliant. And here's the modern conversion of Jet Set Willy by Tez. And again, it looks fantastic. I'm really impressed how well the Retrotink copes with the ropey signal from this Atari machine. Good look at the consoles, and Super Nintendo, a little bit soft. I think the SNES output possibly is a little bit soft. I have turned the sharpening up on the Retrotink, and on the Mega Drive it looks fantastic. Perfectly sharp output, no adjustments needed, worked straight off the bat, looks brilliant. Sega Master System, I think I need a better RGB cable for this machine. I do have a jail bar issue, which is being accentuated by the excellent abilities of the Retrotink. I think my old capture setup masked it slightly, so probably an upgrade needed there. Here's Quartet that I reviewed the other week, or you may not have seen it yet, I don't know. And I mean, look how sharp Mary looks running along there, and let's compare it to the old capture setup, which suddenly looks oh so inadequate, doesn't it? So as you'll have seen, this is a big step up from anything else on the market. Wonderful picture, no lag, well, one frame, and it's a must-own for any 16-bit or 32-bit microcomputer owner. In a world where SCART connectors have pretty much vanished, you're forced to use some kind of converter, and you can get them on eBay for 30 quid, but they're all utterly hopeless. This isn't. It is quite superb. The upsides of this, well, everything. It's just brilliant. You won't get a better display, I think, out of any other device. And it's got such a wide range of inputs, your component, your composite, S-video, RGB, and it should have everything you'd ever want on it. However, I don't understand why it has less tolerance on its inputs than my DVD recorders. The CPC, ST and BBC don't work cleanly out of the box here, and you'll need to adjust the settings. Fine, but why? Do Pioneer have some magic stuff going on inside their DVD recorder that means things just work and this doesn't? I'm not an expert on these things. I don't know. All I know is it's inconvenient having to constantly fiddle around. And then when we get to the presets, you can't name them. So you're having to have a bit of paper with everything scribbled down on it to remember which preset's your CPC, which one's the ST, which one's the Spectrum, which one's the BBC, and so on. And with all those adjustments for the picture, there's actually none for the sound. Some gain and attenuation settings will be very handy because some machines have low output, some have very high. My CPC is quite low. My Amiga 1200 was maxing out on the inputs of my Blackmagic capture device. Now in 50Hz land in the UK, if the device loses sync with the input, my Blackmagic capture card says the tink is actually flipping back to 60Hz until it gets sync again. That's what the capture card's telling me. On a TV you may not notice, but with capture, it will abort at that point and then it goes back to 50Hz. You should just be able to select one output and just keep it at 50Hz to keep the output stable. As I've mentioned, I feel the device build quality feels a bit meh. You may not care the case looks and feels cheap, but I have concerns about the SCART. All of us who had AV equipment in the 90s know all about SCARTs, and you probably had a SCART connector fail on you. This thing doesn't feel like the ones Pioneer and Panasonic give you. It feels like a Bush or an Alba. I look at this with this adapter here. Now, I know part of this is the adapter, but that's just loosey-goosey stuff, and it's not much better with any other SCART connector. If you are plugging in things and unplugging them many times a day, that's not going to last long. Whereas my Pioneer DVD recorders lasted 7 years, multiple pluggings in and out every week. It's fine. I don't think that's going to last. I think I'm going to be buying some kind of breakout for this to make sure I'm not putting excessive strain on that, because all of us who played around with video in the 90s know what happens to VCRs or TVs where you're constantly plugging and unplugging SCARTs, and I think the pins are going to come out between the connector and the board on there, or at least get cracks in them. Either way, it's going to end in tears. With a remote, I get that it's off the shelf, but an overlay would make this a non-issue. It's ridiculous a third party has to supply these. You can buy an overlay from a third party and it'll sort it out, but why? It's not a cheap device. But these are all minor complaints. It's a great device and the quality of the output justifies the cost, even if we're in the UK where you're paying £100 for delivery and taxes and everything else extra. My other reservation is Grey Spectrum Plus 2 owners. I don't think this device is quite ready for you yet. Initially on the surface it seems fine, then actually when you're using it for a great length of time, you'll realise that this rolling problem just seems to kick in at random. Sometimes it goes away, sometimes you have to reset the connection, and I'm not quite sure what's going on there. And the elephant in the room for the RGB devices at least is the OSSC, which is far, far cheaper upscaler than this. But that doesn't support composite or S-video. The designer of the Retrotink made this device for the American Nintendo generation, but somehow it's ended up over here in the hands of the British Cambridge and Brentwood generation. And you know what? Despite the huge cost of getting it over here, it is over £300. The device is well worth the price, and I think most of us will be able to justify it just because of the quality increase alone. Let's ignore all the things like the CRT filters that may or may not be important to you. You will never see your Spectrum, your CPC, your Acorn Archimedes, your BBC Micro, your whatever look so good on a modern display. To put it simply, as I said at the start, it's stunning.